have many mixed thoughts on this book. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jordan and today I'm going to be talking about Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first book in the Grisha trilogy and I have a lot to say about it. I am participating in the Grishalongathon, which was a readathon created by Kat from Paperback Dreams and Cindy from Reads with Cindy, and therefore I will be continuing with the series even though I don't know if I would have had I not been participating in this. We're going to explore all of the feelings and emotions that I am feeling about this book in a short second. So we're going to do this in the usual fashion, which is a short non-spoiler review where I just do an overview of my thoughts, and then we're going to dive into the longer spoilery discussion where I get into the nitty-gritty of my feelings. So let's dive in. This book follows Alina Starkov, an orphan who grew up in a program designed by a duke to teach orphans of peasants how to read and write. And this is where she meets Mal, who is her best friend as a child, and as she grows up, she falls in love with him. Now, Mal is a cutie, and basically he can get any girl that he likes, even Grisha, who are the magic wielders in this world, and basically can manipulate different things and elements around them. And they're kind of a tier above normal people. They're treated as a higher class. And Alina feels that she and Mal are drifting apart. She's in the king's army and they need to cross the Fold, which is basically this large swath of land that was created by an evil Grisha hundreds of years ago. And in this dark swath, everything is dead except for these horrible monsters called Volcra. They are attacked as they're crossing, and Alina discovers that she has a special power, that she is in fact a Grisha, and that this power might be able to save the world. Okay, so my overall feeling leaving this book was that it had a lot of potential, but the execution wasn't necessarily there. Is it a bit derivative? Yes. But that doesn't really bother me so much if the rest of the elements of the story are developed and strong and can kind of carry it, which in this case I don't think they were strong enough to do that. That being said, I really loved the world of Ravka. I thought that it was really interesting to see a fantasy novel set in Imperial Russia, as I haven't really seen a fantasy novel set in that world, and I thought that those elements were incorporated really seamlessly and really created a great atmosphere for this world to take place in. That being said, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more development, and I think the same could be said for the magic system. I really enjoy the idea of the magic system, but I would have loved to see a little bit more rules and get a clearer sense of what the magic system really is in the Ravka universe, or the Grishaverse. The plot had a couple of decent twists and turns, but overall I do think the plot was fairly derivative, and I was able to kind of figure out and guess a lot of what was going to happen. I also thought that for quite a bit of the book, the plot felt kind of meandering and aimless, and I think that has a lot to do with our protagonist. Speaking of which, I do not think Alina is a good protagonist. She is not an active protagonist. A lot of the characters in this book felt weak to me, but I do think that there were a few good ones and that the villain has a lot of potential. And this gives me hope because your girl loves a good villain. Again, I think that the book has a lot of really interesting elements, but for me, the characters just weren't there, which just makes it hard for me to enjoy it. Okay, so that is all I have to say for the short non-spoiler section. So if you want to read this book and you don't want it to be spoiled, thank you for stopping by, but now is your time to get out of here. And with that out of the way, let's just dive into the spoiler section. So as I mentioned earlier, I really like the world of Ravka, and I even like that it is a little bit mysterious because I think that adds to the atmosphere of the world and brings a certain flavor to it. Ravka is inspired by Imperial Russia, and I thought it was really refreshing and exciting to see a fantasy novel set in Imperial Russia, or a kingdom modeled after Imperial Russia, and I thought the cultural elements were woven in really interesting ways, so I will give props to that, even though I think the world could have been developed just a little bit more in this book. And on top of that, I also really liked the other two nations that were introduced in this book. We have Fjerda to the north, which I guess is inspired by Northern European countries or like Vikings, and then we have Shuhan to the south, which is inspired by China. And I thought these two nations were introduced in an interesting way and integrated into the story without really playing a huge role. It just made the world feel bigger, which I appreciated. I also think that the magic system is really interesting. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more detail as far as what the rules are and just have it be a little bit more fleshed out, but I'm hoping to get more of that in the next 2 books and in the Six of Crows duology. Overall, I really like the idea of the magic system, and I think that it has a lot of potential. The writing in the story was good, but I didn't think there was anything particularly noteworthy about it. I think it serviced the story and the plot, but it didn't really add any flavor to the world as far as the word choice and description goes, in my opinion. But that being said, I think it did a good job of what it needed to do, and I also think that Leigh Bardugo writes dialogue really well. So the plot. Okay, so basically we find out that Alina is a sun summoner. She's able to summon light, and therefore she might be able to destroy the fold. Unfortunately, Alina has a very difficult time mastering her power. In fact, she's unable to call her power without an amplifier, which is either the Darkling or her teacher, Baghra. Eventually she figures it out, and she's also slowly falling in love with the Darkling, a magnetic and powerful man who is basically the most powerful Grisha and leads them and has the ability to summon darkness. He promises her that the moment he finds a magical amplifier, which will make her powers that much stronger, they will then destroy the fold together. Baghra, her teacher, on the night that they hear the news that the amplifier has been found, tells Alina that, in fact, the Darkling is not who he says he is. He's the one who created the fold in the first place, and he intends to use her power to control and further expand the fold. Basically, the amplifier will allow him to control her completely as long as he's the one who kills it. By the way, the amplifier is a stag. She flees and meets up with Mal, her childhood friend and the guy that she's in love with, and he convinces her to pursue the stag and kill it herself so that the Darkling can't have the power over her. Unfortunately, when they find it, Alina decides that she just can't kill the stag, and they'll find another way. But unfortunately, the Darkling's been waiting in the trees, and he pops out, kills the stag, places its antlers around her neck, and he is now in control of her. They go to the fold, and he expands it over an entire village, and they all die brutal, horrible deaths from being eaten by the Volcra. That's when Alina discovers that because she had mercy, she is then able to control the power herself of the stag's horns, and she's basically able to save Mal, save herself, and destroy the boat that all the crew members, the Darkling is on it, but all the crew members are on it, and some political ambassadors are also on it, so she just basically leaves them to die. Like 40 people. That's great. Here's the thing, I think the plot is a little expected. I think that, you know, if you take a step back and really think about it as you're reading it, you'll kind of figure out what's going to happen to an extent. I do think there were some good twists and turns, but for the most part, I think it kind of followed the path that you expected it to follow. That being said, I think it could have been fine had it been helmed by a better protagonist. If Alina had been active and the one making decisions and controlling the way her life was going and what was happening in the story, at least in the back half of the book, I think it would have been much more interesting. I mean, obviously that would change the plot a little bit, but I think it could have remained largely the same and would have just been so much better had Alina been a more active character. I don't really have a ton to say about the plot because I do think it was a bit derivative, but that being said, I think it was fine and did a decent job of keeping me engaged and interested. But let's just get to the juicy bit already. Let's talk about the characters, which is my absolute favorite part of every review that I do. So there were a few characters that I really liked in this book, and then there were a few characters that I really disliked. It's not a large cast, so let's start out with some of the more minor characters. All of the female Grisha are beautiful and are painted therefore as vain or dull or mean by our wonderful protagonist. This includes her two friends, Marie and Nadia, who are basically seen as annoying gnats who pester Alina in her free time and only cozy up to her because of her power. They gossip in front of Alina about another girl who's a Grisha named Zoya. She's very beautiful, but she's been super mean to Alina, and Alina still judges them for it despite her and Genya constantly gossiping. It makes Alina seem really shallow and hypocritical to judge her female peers based on her own insecurities and flaws. I didn't love it. So yeah, that's basically how all of the female Grisha are painted, except for one exception. The men aren't treated much better, but at least they have a little bit more variety. For example, Ivan is a horrible brute. The Apparat, who is a religious figure, is kind of horrifying and creepy, but also very intriguing. And David is timid and obsessive over his work, and potentially could be on the autism spectrum. And then we have Genya, who is an exception, kind of, to the way Grisha girls are portrayed in this novel. Genya is Alina's best friend once she arrives at the Little Palace. To be honest, I think she is one of the most interesting characters in this novel. She has the one-of-a-kind ability to basically change slightly the features of other people. She can add brightness to your hair, or clear your skin, or add a flush to your cheeks, and therefore she was gifted to the queen by the Darkling. Not only that, but she was forced to wear servant colors. It's also implied that she was forced to have sex with the king. She's had an extremely hard life, but is still able to find joy in her friendship with Alina. In the end, she chooses the Darkling over Alina though, because he was able to grant her even a small slice of freedom and let her take control of her life at least a little bit more. She's got clear motivations, she's layered and interesting, and I personally love her. Moving on from Genya, let's talk about Mal. He is the childhood friend and love interest, and Mal's character is about the equivalent of white bread. He's attractive and he's good at tracking, and that's about all we know. Like, I actually don't really know what to say about him. He seems nice. He seems like a fairly good guy. I think that the author had a hard task with him, because any time that you have a relationship that was built kind of off screen, like for example with them in their childhood, it's hard for the readers to feel attached to that relationship because they don't get to witness it and feel it build. So the author had a really hard task, but it wasn't helped by the fact that Mal spent most of the book away from Alina. So we really didn't get a sense of their relationship building, nor did we really get a sense of their past, which made it really hard for me to connect with their relationship and really root for it. But let's talk about the Darkling now. I love him. He is such a scary antagonist because he is so magnetic and charming. He completely made me fall in love with him as the book progressed, even though I got this kind of bad feeling. He's just that energized every time that he's in a scene. At first, like Alina, I was timid of him because of his insane power, but as the book progressed and as we got to know more of him, I honestly genuinely started to ship them, and even though I got a sense that something was a little bit off, he's that manipulative and charming, but like you don't know he's manipulating you until you look back, kind of thing. That's how well he's written, and I thought it was masterfully done. And then once he's revealed to be the villain, he's ruthless and he drops the facade, but it still feels right. Like, it doesn't feel like it's a complete 180 in his character. It just kind of confirms your suspicions. I just thought his character was handled so beautifully. I am a little concerned though, because I think that it was really well done in this book, because we get, completely disarmed when we find out that he is the villain. But I think it's going to be hard for Leigh Bardugo to kind of maintain that level of intensity and ruthlessness without making him too cartoonish and flat, because he is so evil and power hungry. So it'll be interesting to see how that is handled moving forwards. But finally, let's talk about Alina. She is the worst. She is like Mayor Barrow levels of inactive in her own story, and she's judgy and indecisive and self-pitying, and it just makes her so hard to like. In fact, the more the book progressed, the less I liked her. She starts off being whiny and feeling sorry for herself because she and Mal are drifting apart, despite her not really doing much about it. And then when she discovers that she has these amazing powers and that she might be able to help everyone in her kingdom, at first she denies it, which, like, fair enough. I get that that would be like a huge shift in your life, but it goes on forever where she's denying it. She's like, oh no, I cannot be Grisha, this is ridiculous. But it's like, honey, we've seen you do your powers not once but twice, so chill with that. And then on top of that, she's wishing for a long time that she could just go back to the army and have her old life, despite not really seeming like she liked her old life that much anyway. So that was just really confusing to me. Then she eventually gives up on Mal because she wrote him a bunch of letters and never heard back, and that's what makes her able to finally call her powers on her own, is letting go of her past. But then her character just does like a complete kind of 180 where then she's like, oh yes, no, I was meant to be Grisha, I love my powers, this is what I was supposed to do. All of her development happens in these rough jumps rather than progressing in a natural, gradual way. She also seems to be manipulated and led constantly by the other people in her life. She's first manipulated and led by the Darkling, who convinces her to trust him and says that once she's trained and he's given her the Morozova amplifier, she and him will then destroy the fold. Then Baghra reveals to her that that is in fact not true and tells her to leave, so she does. Then she hooks up with Mal, and Mal convinces her that they need to go get Morozova's amplifier for themselves, and she does. I think the first decision that she truly makes for herself in this entire book is when she decides not to kill the stag. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't even like this because it just seemed so false. She doesn't seem to care that much about the things and people around her. And so this moment of mercy just seemed to come out of nowhere. On top of that, it's actually really selfish because she's basically putting the entire country and the entire world at risk if she doesn't have this power to herself and if the Darkling is able to control her, which of course happens. Not only that, but when the Darkling appears, he injures the animal, and really all she has to do is deliver the death blow. She knows the Darkling's gonna do it anyway, and she can't even do that for like no reason. It just, the thought process wasn't there. I didn't understand why she was having mercy on the animal, so it just didn't make sense to me, and it made her seem weaker instead of stronger. Like, it's gonna die anyway. Why don't you just deliver the death blow and save countless people from suffering, including yourself and your boy toy? She is then subjected to the whims of the Darkling. They go into the Shadowfold, he does the evil and destroys an entire town, and then she realizes that because of her mercy and strength, she is able to control the amplifier herself. Which, like, that's not what's been established in the book. It just felt like a cop-out, really, because it's not what's been established in the book, and it just felt so weak. Like, again, it wasn't intentional. Like, she didn't intentionally not kill the deer. Like, it just felt weak to me. And honestly, I don't think she develops much throughout the story at all. She just constantly pities herself and relies on others to make decisions for her. So I am not a fan. But I am interested to see how her character does evolve in future books, and I'm hoping that she evolves quite a lot because I can't stand her right now. So we'll see how that goes. But that is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned, I am going to be doing the Grishalongathon, so hit that notification bell if you'd like to see the reviews that I post for the rest of the series. But I think that's all I have for you, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.